Hi again then guys, and welcome to the first ever Special Projects Replica build on Forza 7. And for those who are maybe new to my Special Projects style videos, basically this is a form of tune setup tutorial, but instead of a normal one like for drag or drift or top speed, this isn't about that. This isn't even necessarily about winning races. This is about tuning a car in such a way that's got more pizzazz to it. It's a bit more alternative to just being the fastest. It could be a replica of a real race car that isn't on the game. It could be a custom version of a car which doesn't have a racing version on the game. So with that in mind, this is a straight up replica, in particular a technical replica rather than a visual one. Now as you can see, I do have a different livery on this Ferrari 641 than what it comes with initially, because the replica car that we're going for is a Williams model called the FW15C. Now this livery is from the storefront. Just type in Williams in the search box and you'll find it. It's not one of my replicas. If I have the time I might drop one, but I just don't have that much time for making liveries. But it looks very close. It's not an exact replica of this model, but it is very, very close to it. And the model in question is called the FW15C, and the C in particular is the important part, because this car is well known to most F1 fans because it's so technologically advanced. And for me personally, it's one of my favourite race cars of all time, alongside the Brabham BT46B. That and this are my two favourite F1 cars ever. And the standout thing about the FW15C is easily the gearbox, because this car has what we call a CVT gearbox, or continually variable transmission. And basically what that means is, instead of having conventional interlinked gears in most cars, race cars or road, you have two sets of, in effect, cones with a drive belt or drive chain running between them. And the advantage of this system is that instead of changing through interlinking gears to change a speed, in effect, the cone distances can change from the two pairs. The two pairs in relation to each other don't change, but the two individual pairs change, if you know what I mean. Or maybe you don't know what I mean, but it's not hard to Google it. And basically the result of that is that it gives you, within of course two opposing limitations of the highest and lowest possible ratio that you've got, basically infinite ratios between the two. It's like having thousands of gears or hundreds of gears in your gearbox without actually ever having to change gear. So the result is it gives you seamless acceleration and very, very interesting sounds, because of course the car doesn't have a gear change noise because it never changes gear. And again, you can hear this car on YouTube. It sounds pretty crazy. Now on the game, we can't fully replicate that kind of tune, because a CVT could seem like it has one gear, but that's actually not the case. It's like it has hundreds, as I said. On the game, the closest we can get is by actually giving the car one gear and getting it as good all round as we can. So to do that, as you can see, I would recommend the lowest possible final drive, and then from second gear onward also the lowest possible, but that doesn't really matter. You can set from 2 onward on whatever you want because you're not going to be using it. The important thing is final drive and first gear. Now for first, I would recommend 2.51, and I would also recommend using a manual gearbox for this car, because otherwise it will change up into second gear and you will lose speed. So keep it in manual. You never need to use it though, just put it in first gear and you're ready to go. You never need to change up or down. And as you can see, even with one gear, it's pretty quick, under 3 seconds to 60, 5.2 to 100, which of course is a lot slower than using all 7 gears, and the top speed is 192. It can actually go up around 195, 196. Now the real car has better numbers than that, because as I said, it doesn't have just one gear, but this gives you some idea of what it could be like to drive that car. Now I would recommend having neutral camber and neutral toe, but some people might want to have some camber. Of course it depends on driving style. I've gone for 1 degree of caster. As far as the anti-roll, I've got those both on 10. The springs on 315, 310 with the lowest ride height front and rear. Dampers we've got on 7 and 5 respectively. With the aero, you can change this. Now there is a version of this tune replica on my storefront. You can use the keywords down below to find it, but you've basically got two options if you do the tune for yourself instead, because with the highest downforce, you do of course have better handling. However, if you want better top-end acceleration, for instance on a track like the Le Mans, or maybe Catalunya, for instance, where you can easily get up to 190 in a car like this, then I'd recommend the lowest aero. And the difference that makes is quite drastic. Now, I tested this car in a number of scenarios, including a full Nordschleife lap and also a half-mile drag, and I compared it to using all 7 gears. Now, it was slower. As I said, this is not a better tune than the normal car, it's just a tune for those people who, like myself, love the Williams model and would like to feel what it could be like, or at least as close as we can get to it, on the game. That being said, it's not as much slower over a half mile as you might think. It's about 0.6 behind when you use all 7 gears, or 0.6 behind when you use 1 gear instead of all 7. So that's not bad. That's not bad at all. The top speed is not far off either, and the great thing about the car is the top speed doesn't actually change regardless of the aero settings, because the top speed on this model is not governed by the aero, it's governed by the ratio. So that doesn't change, you just get there quicker. That's the big difference. Now, as far as the diff on this model, I changed it around, used a few different settings, but one of the issues which arises with using a gearbox setup like this is that you have very little engine braking. And what that means is when you change down through your gears in a normal race car, or any car really, any car with a normal gearbox that is, the engine also helps to slow you down. The gearing helps to slow you down as well as just the brakes. In this car, in a similar way to a gas turbine vehicle, it doesn't want to slow down because it's just a totally different gear ratio that you're working with. So you will need to use your brakes a lot in this car. And I'd recommend using them quite heartily, to say the least. Slam on the brakes, but it's more than fast enough to make up for it. There are, of course, some corners that you can coast through, but I would recommend 0% on both acceleration and decel. That may seem strange, and of course you can try others if you want, but I just found it to be way too heavy through corners with any other settings, or at least with the other settings that I'd been trying. So that's it for the setup overall. So now, of course, all that remains is to actually show what kind of performance this car can give you on an actual racetrack. Now, as I mentioned, this tune is not really about being better than the car already is, because it categorically is not. With that being said, though, this is not a slow car by any means. My first full lap of the Nordschleife in this model was 5.5 minutes. 5 minutes and exactly 30 seconds. Of course not to the millisecond, but that's pretty rapid for a car that's only using 1 gear. Now, of course, that 1 gear setup has definite downsides. And as I mentioned earlier on in the video, that's just the nature of using 1 gear. But at the very least, this gives you some idea of what it would be like to drive the Williams FW15C on the game. Personally, I love the car. I think that the CVT is a very undervalued piece of technology. My favourite gearbox ever, which is a weird thing to say. I mean, who has favourite gearboxes? I guess I do. And it's an excellent one. It's a case of just being not given the development, for the most part, that it deserves. So overall, if you do decide to use this replica, and obviously get the livery if you want on the storefront as well, then, of course, I hope you have a lot of fun with it. And potentially win races as well. It can certainly do that. But overall, if you'd like to check out more tunes for Forza 7 and various other Forza games, then of course you can find those by clicking through at the end of this video. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.